The Subcommittee on Homeland Security will come to order. Today's hearing on the Transportation Security Administration's budget request for fiscal year 2023 is being conducted virtually. Therefore, we must address a few housekeeping matters. During today's virtual hearing, members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. When you are recognized to speak, if I notice you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. And to avoid inadvertent background noise, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participant microphones when they are not recognized to speak. If there's a technology issue during a member speaking time, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. We will be following the 5-minute rule with 1 minute remaining in your time. The clock will turn yellow. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red, and it will be time to recognize the next member. We will follow the speaking order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member, followed by members present at the time the hearing is called to order, in order of seniority, and we will alternate by party. Next, we will go to members who were not present when the hearing was called to order until every member present has had a first round. Members can submit information in writing at any of our hearings or markups using the email address provided in advance to your staff. Let us begin. I would like to welcome Administrator Pekoski to today's hearing. You have appeared many times before the subcommittee to discuss the importance of TSA's mission and its dedicated frontline workforce. The pandemic has taken a toll on TNSA and changed the way the agency operates, as it has for the rest of the federal government and the country as a whole. I look forward to today's discussion of the President's budget request for TSA, and in particular, the need to reform TSA's pay structure and provide protections for employees which are equivalent to the rest of the federal workforce. We have spoken about the value of these reforms and the importance of implementing them as soon as possible. These are reforms which I fully support. The challenge of transitioning TSA personnel at the start of 2023 to a new pay system where they will be treated like the rest of the federal workforce would cost nearly $1 billion. Unfortunately, the administration did the subcommittee no favors in how this was proposed in the budget. Rather than directly funding the new pay structure, the President's budget proposes a change to existing law to make more resources available to TSA from the security fees charged to airline passengers. Currently, a portion of those fees are diverted to the Treasury for deficit reduction. I support ending the diversion of those fees, but unfortunately, changing existing law is not within this subcommittee's jurisdiction. As a result, the administration has given the subcommittee a bill we may not be able to afford within our funding allocation. Well, it will be a challenge. I feel strongly about this, so the committee will do its best to meet the challenge in our upcoming bill. I would also like to discuss briefly a troubling incident which was brought to my attention. Last week, I was contacted by a passenger at LAX who at a security checkpoint was denied the ability to take onto the airplane supplies she needed for breastfeeding, notwithstanding that TSA's policies appear to permit it. Well, at this time, you may not be able to comment on this matter. I do appreciate your immediate attention to this serious matter, and I expect that it will be addressed in a way that will prevent it from happening again. Administrator Pekoski, your current term as TSA administrator was ending this summer when we first planned this hearing. I had presumed this would be your last appearance before the subcommittee. So I was very pleased when President Biden announced earlier this month he would be nominating you for a second term. You have my full support, and I hope the Senate will promptly take up your nomination. I now turn to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, Ranking Member Fleischman, for his opening remarks.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, for holding this very important hearing. Welcome, Administrator Pekoski. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. I appreciate meeting with you in person last week. You've always been so accessible. And I would also like to reiterate my congratulations to you, sir, for your recent nomination for a second term. Congratulations. TSA protects the United States transportation system, the engine that powers our economic prosperity. Originally, effective transportation security was based on threats from shadowy actors like Al Qaeda. Over the past 2 decades, these threats have grown to include cyber criminals, state and non-state actors, and others who seek to exploit vulnerabilities in the aviation, rail, and pipeline networks to their advantage. Despite robust efforts of the transportation security officers, or TSOs, transportation hubs, particularly aviation, remain targets for terrorists and other actors. Our security posture, especially at the checkpoint, has regrettably remained largely static. Most travelers must still remove their shoes more than 21 years after a single failed attempt to detonate a shoe bomb on a transatlantic flight. And the basic technology used to screen passengers today was first deployed nearly 15 years ago. However, modern technological innovation like computed tomography scanning enables TSOs to render 3D images that are far superior to traditional 2D X-ray scans. Coupled with advanced artificial intelligence and machine learning, these scanning machines dramatically increase contraband detention rates by TSA agents while increasing passenger throughput and reducing checkpoint wait times. They may even lead to the day where we can leave a laptop in its case and take a bottle of water through the security checkpoint, something we can all celebrate. Replacing legacy X-ray machines at passenger checkpoints like we have through the checked baggage system will ensure that no airport represents a weak point of entry into the passenger aviation system. Ensuring this upgrade happens as quickly as possible is a security imperative. Similar advances in credential authentication technology enables TSOs to identify fraudulent documents and quickly confirm passenger identity. As criminals and terrorist organizations move into the cyber domain, investments in cyber defenses for our transportation system will help booster our online defenses. I look forward to hearing how you are partnering with CISA and the private sector to ensure that our cyber infrastructure is protected alongside our physical infrastructure. I'm also pleased to note the continuation of the Federal Flight Deck Officer and Crew Program, which is a critical last line of defense against the worst case scenario of an in-flight hijacking. Finally, I have reservations about the nearly $1 billion requested for personnel compensation benefits and collective bargaining. TSA's own estimates suggest that the total cost for these pay increases amounts to $7.9 billion over the course of 5 years. While I wholeheartedly believe in providing appropriate pay to the men and women of TSA and appreciate their dedication and service to our nation, we will need to balance pay increases against other funding requirements of the department. Again, sir, I would like to thank you for your service and leadership. I look forward to our conversation today. Madam Chairwoman, I thank you and I yield back.
Administrator Prokowski, we will submit the full text of your official statement for the hearing record. Please begin your oral summary, which I would ask you keep to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Rebel Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, and distinguished members of the Homeland Security Subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today, and Chairwoman and Ranking Member, I appreciate your comments and your opening statements. I am extremely grateful for the productive relationship TSA enjoys with this subcommittee and the longstanding support we've received from its members and staff. Madam Chairwoman and Ranking Member, I appreciate your letters of condolence for those we have lost during the pandemic. They convey your strong bipartisan support of our people and have been very meaningful to the families and colleagues that we have lost. As TSA Administrator, I've had the great honor of leading our dedicated employees as they perform our mission of protecting the nation's transportation systems with excellence every day. Near the beginning of my term as administrator, I established 3 strategic priorities to guide the agency through its 25th anniversary in 2026. They are to improve security and safeguard the transportation system, to accelerate action, and commit to our people. As I come before you today, nearing the end of the 5th year as administrator, I want to use this opportunity to update you on our progress on those priorities enabled by the appropriations you have provided, and how in fiscal year 2023, we request your support to continue this effort. TSA's most important asset is its people. We cannot be successful in our vital mission without a professional, engaged, and enabled workforce. That's why commit to our people is a strategic priority, and why attracting and retaining our transportation security officers and other frontline and support personnel is critically important to Homeland and national security. As you know, significant parts of TSA's workforce are underpaid relative to other federal government employees, and that continues to impede TSA's ability to improve the overall employee experience and therefore our ability to recruit and retain at levels our mission demands. This is most acute in our screening operations. 81% of our uniformed TSOs make less than their GS equivalents. But it's an agency-wide issue too. Overall, 75% of the current TSA workforce receives pay that is lower than our counterparts in other federal agencies. This is unfair, has mission impact, and I ask for your support to put us on an equitable footing with the rest of government. To address this long-term pay inequity, the fiscal year 2023 budget includes $871 million to ensure TSA employees are paid at a level commensurate with their counterparts on the general schedule pay scale. It also requests an additional $121 million to establish labor relations support to manage expanded labor relations benefits for TSOs, as well as supporting their right to adverse action appeals through the Merit System Protection Board. If we don't address TSA's long-term pay inequity, or even defer some common sense solutions for a short time, this would have significant adverse impacts to our people. In fact, it could lead to many of our officers and other valued employees to leave the agency just as the nation's transportation system and aviation sector recovers from the pandemic. At the same time, it would undercut recruitment efforts and likely require TSA to continue to increase short-term hiring and retention incentives to counter those losses. As we continue to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic that has impacted so many over the last 2 years, TSA expects passenger volumes to return to the historical year-over-year growth rate of 4.5%. We expect to screen over 2 million passengers per day this summer and be at or very close to pre-pandemic passenger volumes. The FY23 budget will strengthen TSA's ability to recruit, hire, train, and retain staffing levels needed to keep pace with the demands of increasing volumes in fiscal 23, while also meeting wait time standards and continuing to provide effective and efficient security. I would like to take a moment here to discuss the incident, Madam Chairwoman, that you mentioned that occurred at Los Angeles International Airport, where a passenger traveling with gel ice packs, one of which was frozen and the other partially frozen to keep breast milk cold, experienced screening that was not consistent with our standard operating procedures. I share your concern about this incident and assure the members of this committee and the American public that we will continue to look closely at our training and security procedures to make sure they are being consistently and properly applied at our checkpoints nationwide. We have reached out to and spoken with the passenger to express our apologies, and I am sure there are other passengers who have had a similar experience. We will fix this and have already updated our online information and provided a refresher brief to our entire screening workforce. Our next strategic priority, Accelerate Action, recognizes that a well-trained, appropriately compensated, and sufficiently sized workforce can only be successful if they have the right tools for the job. It is imperative we continue to accelerate action to strengthen checkpoint screening operations by investing in new technology that will improve screening effectiveness, efficiency, and the passenger experience. To that end, the FY23 budget includes $105 million for the Checkpoint Property Screening System program and $19 million for on-person screening algorithm development to address capability gaps and detect new and evolving threats in civil aviation. TSA's third strategic priority is to secure and safeguard the nation's transportation systems. Implicit in that priority is the need to recognize evolving threats from adversaries and anticipate their changing tactics. The FY23 budget requests $23.5 million to enable early detection and dramatically improve the cybersecurity of TSA networks and our ability to protect TSA sensitive data in compliance with recent executive orders and OMB direction. Across the transportation sector, TSA continues to help partners build cybersecurity resilience and improve incident response focusing on the pipeline, rail, and aviation sectors. In closing, Chairman Roybal Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, members of the subcommittee, thank you again for your strong support and the opportunity to testify before you today. I look forward to the opportunity to respond to your questions.
Administrator Pekoski, we have spoken many times about the relatively low compensation provided to TSA's workforce, especially transportation security officers, when compared to other federal employees. We've also discussed the importance of providing TSA's workforce the same worker protections made available to other federal workers. As you know, legislation to place TSOs into the Title V Civil Service pay system was passed by the House last week. It is not clear what the bill's fate will be in the Senate. But even without that legislation, you have broad authority over the pay structure for TSA personnel, and the FY23 budget proposes to implement a new pay structure beginning next year. As I discussed in my opening remarks, the way the administration is proposing to pay for that presents a huge challenge for this subcommittee. In your opening statement, you talked a little bit about this, but I would like for you to expand a little bit more on the importance of these proposed changes to the workforce and to our nation's transportation security, especially what the consequences would be if these changes were not made.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I appreciate the question, and I would first reflect on HR 903, which the House passed last week, and reiterate my strong support for that bill. It's critically important that we bring compensation levels across the entire agency in TSA into alignment with what our employees' counterparts in most of the rest of the federal government receive. In addition, it's important that our labor framework be similar to what other employees in the federal government receive, especially for our transportation security officers. I couldn't emphasize any stronger to you the importance of both these initiatives. And as I said in my opening statement, the impact on TSA is quite significant if we do not implement what's in the fiscal 2023 budget. We are having a very tough time during this particular last 6 to 8 months in recruiting people to come on board TSA to work in our various disciplines within the agency, but most especially as transportation security officers. Our attrition rates have historically been very high. They remain very high. And what that results in is first a drain on the overall talent within the agency that is particularly important to maintain a certain number of years experience within every screening checkpoint across the system. And it also means that we will have to recruit even more, which is, as I said just a minute ago, very, very challenging for us. So I would submit that these initiatives that are in the FY23 budget are absolutely critical to the continued ongoing success of TSA. And then I would just overlay on top of that the observation that we all have when we're flying now is that the aviation sector is largely recovered. We're at 90+% recovered already on most days. Passenger volume is over 2 million most days already, and we expect it to continue to grow over the summer and into fiscal 23. For us, we need to be prepared for that. It takes about 6 months for us to bring somebody on and to train them and certify them in the positions they perform in our screening checkpoints. So it's not something we can turn on and turn off quickly either.
Can you briefly talk about what steps the administration is taking to ensure the fee revenue proposed to help pay for this initiative will actually be available?
The fee revenue to pay for the initiative comes out of the aviation security passenger fee. Madam Chairwoman, as you mentioned in your opening statement and your follow-on question, the way that fee is currently structured, the first $250 million of fee revenue goes to the Aviation Security Capital Fund. And then the next, in fiscal 23, the next $1.52 billion goes to deficit reduction. And then the balance of the fee revenue is used to offset the appropriations for TSA. The proposal is that we end that deficit reduction diversion and use those revenues to compensate for the increased funds we're going to have to spend to provide equitable pay for the TSA workforce and equitable labor relations rights for that workforce. And so the current law does need to be changed. There are legislative proposals to do that. The other thing that I would emphasize here is that there is not a proposal to increase the aviation security passenger fee itself. The proposal is to keep the fee at the same levels, but just end the $1.52 billion diversion, which increases by $40 million every year, all the way through fiscal year 27.
Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question, sir, the budget requests nearly $1 billion for increased pay, benefits, and collective bargaining for TSOs. While I fully believe in paying TSOs as a competitive benefits package, I understand that the 5-year cost is nearly $8 billion. Balancing this need against other priorities, is there, sir, a scalable way to increase benefits?
So in balancing against other priorities, I would just offer that aviation security is a critical priority for the Homeland Security and the national security of the United States. And for too many years, the TSA workforce, and this is beyond the transportation security officer workforce, although it's most acute within that workforce, and that is the largest workforce component within TSA. But the pay inequity applies to pay levels and specialties across the entire agency. I mentioned in my opening statement that 75% of the TSA workforce, if you classified their positions in the general schedule, they would see a pay increase. So that pay inequity is significant for us. And I would just observe that we participate and have benefited greatly by the federal employee viewpoint surveys that come out every year. And they assess worker views on the agency, worker views on the morale within the agency. TSA has always struggled in those surveys. And what those surveys show clearly year after year after year is that pay is the #1 issue by far of any factor. Now, I wouldn't say that pay is the only issue, but if we address this issue, it will result in a workforce that's equitably paid, has a labor framework that is similar to other federal agencies, and also will improve retention, which will be important for our security effectiveness. And it's just something that, in my opinion, we need to do. I've had 5 years in this job. I've tried many different ways to improve the compensation package for our frontline workforce. They have moved the needle a little bit, but not nearly enough compared to what needs to happen and what I believe that the American public's expectations are for their experience going through aviation screening.
Understand your position, sir. As you mentioned, you propose paying for these costs by ending the deficit reduction program for passenger fees that was put in place under the Ryan Murray budget deal in 2013. My question, sir, is do you have other suggestions to pay for the increases in TSA pay, sir?
Sure. Thank you for your question, Ranking Member. And from my perspective, there's no room within the TSA budget to offset this requirement for additional pay. Our budget is very, very tight as it is. Our acquisition program is proceeding along, but we have very, very far out your full operating capability dates for some of our key technology upgrades, which you mentioned in your opening statement. So from a TSA budget perspective, there's absolutely no room in the TSA budget to fund this initiative. And I would note, too, that I appreciate the committee's efforts to help partially fund this beginning in fiscal 21 and going on into fiscal 22. We've been trying to do this piecemeal. It just has not provided the impact and the effect that we had hoped. And plus, we're dealing with an incredibly competitive labor market in the United States that I don't expect to subside anytime in the foreseeable future.
Well, thank you for your answer, sir. Administrator Pekoski, I do have some other questions, but they're rather in depth on tomography. So I think, Madam Chair, what I will do is wait for my round 2 and yield back to you so others may ask. Thank you.
Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Pekoski, thank you for being with us today. Like the chairwoman, I was concerned to learn of the incident last week where TSA agents at the LAX airport refused to let a breastfeeding mother bring ice packs to insulate breast milk through security. TSA made the mother check the ice packs, and as a result, she was unable to pump before her 5-hour-long flight. I'm glad TSA issued an apology for this incident, but it's not a new problem. For years, the chairwoman and others have encouraged TSA to make sure that families can safely travel with breast milk and formula. The best way to do this is to ensure families have clear guidance from TSA. When I reviewed the existing guidance that comes up first, when you Google, though, I saw this caveat at the bottom. Quote, the final decisions rest with the TSA officer on whether an item is allowed through the checkpoint. I'd like to know more, sir, about how exactly TSA officers make these determinations. Can you lay out the specific circumstances that would cause a TSA officer to prevent an item needed for breastfeeding, such as gel and ice packs, from going through the checkpoint?
No, thank you, Congresswoman Underwood. I appreciate the question, and we have updated all of our web guidance to be explicitly clear that breast milk and formula are permitted through the screening process. Now, to directly answer your question, there are some additional procedures when we see volumes of liquid that might be above the limit of 3.4 ounces. And we just do some checks on those substances, as we always do. And that's where the discretion on the part of the Federal Security Director and the officer come into play. I would expect that formula and breast milk will check clear on that, and they typically do. And the key thing for us is, we have a lot of information on our website, but I also like to emphasize that we do have a Twitter handle if there are any questions that passengers ask, and we generally get back within a minute or so to those questions. And a passenger can always ask for a supervisor. And I agree, and my goal, and I'm sure yours is, that these issues are handled as a routine matter as people are going through the screening checkpoint. That is our intent. Every once in a while, it doesn't happen that way, and that's where a supervisor needs to come in and address the situation. Now, I know in the case at LAX, the passenger did ask to speak to a supervisor. I don't think that process was handled properly either, and we are addressing that.
Excellent. So reports are already indicating that Americans will be traveling more this summer than at any point since the beginning of the pandemic, which will mean busier airports and longer lines for security. In your testimony, you state that TSA expects travel volume to reach up to 3 million passengers per day, which is a 50% increase over the current volume and a 25% increase over the busiest pre-pandemic travel days in 2019. You also state that TSA is planning to meet heightened travel volumes by recruiting a workforce that can meet those demands and ensuring passenger wait time expectations are met while maintaining security effectiveness. Can you elaborate on the specific steps you're taking to make sure that travelers do not experience excessive wait times?
Yes, ma'am. We've taken a number of steps. As I stated in my opening statement and in response to the chairwoman's question, it's hard for pretty much everybody, whether it's a private sector entity or a government agency, to hire at the levels we need to hire at the present time. And so what we've done is we put a number of processes in place to counterbalance that. For example, we've increased retention incentives at airports where we see that the attrition rates are higher than other airports of similar size. So those retention incentives have been out there, and we have the ability under current law to adjust those. Literally, we could adjust retention incentives tomorrow if we chose to do that. And we've used that tool successfully. We also pay significant recruiting bonuses now, up to $2,000 for new people coming on board, but we pay out that bonus over a full year. So you get a bonus when you come into work the first time, and then you get the bonus after a year of service within the agency. We have created a new category of employees at the screening checkpoint that are not screening officers. They're called security support assistants. The idea there is to be able to hire these individuals quicker because they don't need to meet all the requirements that we have in place for transportation security officers, and to have them do things like provide instructions to passengers on what to take out of their carry-on bags, for example, before it goes through the X-ray, and to do some bin management back and forth within the checkpoints. That is kicking off. It looks like it's going to be very successful. I was just down at Atlanta Airport yesterday, and they have about 1,600 applicants in the queue for both TSO employment and this security support assistant employment. So I'm think that's going to be very positive for us. And then lastly, we have a national deployment force within TSA. Pre-pandemic, it was about 250 volunteers, and these are fully certified officers. Over the course of the pandemic and then up to today, we've increased that to about 1,000 officers. And so these are officers that volunteer to deploy their excess to their current airport's needs, and we just move them to other airports with the anticipation of what volumes are going to be, because we've worked very closely with the carriers and with our own projections to estimate, hey, when airports are really going to need some additional men and women in the screening checkpoints. And so all these things together, I think, will help us meet the demand. Final thing very quickly is that yes, the recovery has been robust, and we're over 2 million per day. There is very much a potential for a 3 million person day over the course of this summer, but that recovery is a bit uneven, and that's why we're able to take some resources from airports that have not fully recovered and put them to some airports that are either already at 2019 levels and some in excess of 2019 levels.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Palazzo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Administrator, thank you for being here today. Also, thank you for your career before this new career in the United States Coast Guard. Being the 26th Vice Commandant is no small task, and so I know you've got the executive experience to lead TSA. But again, thank you for your service to your nation twice now. So thank you. TSA is undergoing significant changes to the pre-check enrollment process. As you know, the TSA pre-check program is among the most popular federal programs under DHS. However, I have concerns with how this transition is being carried out. Specifically, we have concerns about the privacy of the traveling public. Are DHS and TSA committed to ensuring that passenger data and information will not be commercialized and be sold or handled by third parties outside of pre-check enrollment contract holders? And is DHS also able to put clear privacy protections in place?
Yes, sir. Thank you first for your comments. And then for the question on our Trusted Traveler programs, they have been very, very successful, both TSA PreCheck and Customs and Border Protection Global Entry Program. If you're in either program, you get the PreCheck insignia on your boarding pass, paper or electronic, that gives you PreCheck privileges when you go through screening. We are seeing PreCheck enrollments return already to pre-pandemic levels. So people have already started to come back into the enrollment process to enroll in TSA PreCheck. We take very high care for all of the personally identifiable information that a passenger provides. And we have criteria for all of our enrollment providers to ensure that not only do they protect the information when they store it within their own systems, but when they're transmitting that information across, we use the highest protocols to be able to ensure that data is protected. TSA PreCheck and Global Entry are hugely valuable programs for us. They increase security effectiveness, they increase security efficiency, and as I'm sure almost all of us on this call are, we are already Trusted Traveler members. That is a significant passenger convenience factor as well.
Yes, sir, and I appreciate that. Can you? I don't know if you answered my primary part of my question. Is TSA or DHS, are y'all going to sell or commercialize the information that you collect on travelers?
Sure. No, TSA and DHS do not sell or commercialize the data, but we do have new TSA enrollment providers through an OTA agreement that should come online sometime in the next several months. And they have the opportunity to bundle the TSA PreCheck service with other offerings they may offer, but it's a passenger's choice to go to those additional vendors, which are very important for us because we want to increase the network across the country where passengers can readily get TSA PreCheck enrollment and renewal. So they're able to bundle that information, but it's only with the passenger's acknowledgement that the information they provide will be used for that purpose.
And privacy protections are in place to protect the traveler's data.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
All right. Next question. According to a September 2021 Credential Authentication Technology Procurement and Deployment Report to Congress, TSA has deployed CAT units to 119 airports. What is TSA's plan to expand the deployment and operation of CAT systems to all checkpoint screening lanes across the 430 federalized airports?
So our plan is to do just that, is to deploy the CAT technology across every single airport within our system. The CAT technology is a significant security enhancement. Not only does it electronically validate the credential that's offered, but the newest version of CAT technology does a one-to-one match with a camera and matches what the camera sees with the passenger standing in front of the camera and the credentials image digitized. So it's significantly effective there. The additional part of the CAT 2 procurement is that it is connected to our secure flight database, which is the database that we use to vet all passengers and assess a risk status to passengers. So it lets us readily identify who is a pre-check passenger, who is a standard lane passenger, who is the passenger that may need additional screening, and that's done in near real time. I think it's critically important that this capability be at every single airport in the system, because in our system, if you come into one airport, you're essentially in the entire system. So I'd appreciate the continued strong support of this committee for the CAT program.
All right, thank you. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Ms. Henson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Administrator Pekoski. I want to thank you for the work that you and TSA agents do and those officers are doing to keep Iowans safe as we all travel, obviously frequent flyers. So really appreciate the job that they do. And I know that the industry has really been ravaged by COVID, lots of shifts in work schedules, lots of challenges to which your folks have had to adapt. And so I appreciate your attentiveness and your responsiveness to all of these issues, as well as specifically touching on cybersecurity. Iowa's critical infrastructure has been subject to several cyber attacks in the past year. So I certainly appreciate you keeping that top of mind. And I know keeping passengers safe as they travel is a top priority for TSA. Up-to-date technology plays a significant role in that, and specifically replacing the aging baggage point screening technology is your number one tech acquisition in the budget request. And actually, one of the airports in my district in Waterloo is set to get some of this new technology from the program later this year. So I would just ask you straight away, what are the benefits of these new systems for baggage screening?
Ma'am, thank you for your question. Thanks for your reference to cybersecurity, because we've done a lot of work on that, particularly over the last 12 months. But with your question regarding CT or computed tomography X-ray technology, we've used CT technology in check baggage for a good number of years, but only recently have those systems been able to be sized to the point that they can be used in screening checkpoints. The advantages of those systems are, first and foremost, they can detect an awful lot more. The technology is different, and its ability to detect is significantly better than the current technology that's there. Additionally, the technology is able to look at a carry-on bag from a three-dimensional perspective. And so what passengers will see is when the CT technology is employed, even standard lane passengers won't have to take laptops out of their carry-on bag, won't have to take liquid aerosols and gels out, because the reason we had those taken out in the past was the X-ray system couldn't see beyond that metal block. With the CT technology, it can literally see underneath, sideways. You can slice through what's in a carry-on bag. The other benefit of the CT technology is that it will result in fewer bag searches. So, we just came through a pandemic. One of the things that we wanted to do was to limit the amount of physical contact between our officers and passengers' belongings. Because the CT technology results in more on-screen resolution. So if you see something on the screen that's of concern, you can resolve a lot more of them than with the current technology right on the screen without having to do a bag search. And then if you do have to do a bag search, it's a very targeted bag search. We know
Right, so it's really an efficiency thing, and so that'll save time and obviously frustration for passengers not having to take all that stuff out going through a checkpoint as well.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And specifically, obviously, this budget calls for $105 million for baggage screening technology updates. At this point, with that request, how long do you anticipate that it will take for a full replacement of baggage screening tech across the country?
If we took $105 million and just extended it out into the out years, it would take us until fiscal year 2036 to complete this acquisition. And that's from a funding perspective. And then we would need the follow-on year to fully install those systems we acquire in fiscal 36. The other thing that I would emphasize on this program is it's been in place for a while. We have contract vehicles already in existence, and we have a series of vendors that are competing for these contracts. And as I said earlier, not only does this provide better passenger experience and provide a better tool in the hands of the officers, it simply provides much better security. And as we look at the threats going out into the next 5 to 10 years, we need to have this capability in place as soon as we can.
Yeah, well, one question to follow up on that. I would say if it's a number one priority, why is it taking so long? Should we be moving it up on the priority scale? And then the other thing, when you look at this length of time, that's a lot of maintenance for legacy systems as well. So how much are you anticipating that to cost to maintain legacy systems while you're rolling this out?
You're right. The cost for legacy systems is still there, but we've been pretty successful in keeping our legacy system cost. It does increase year to year, but not nearly as much as you would expect given the age of some of our X-ray systems. Yes, it is taking a little bit longer. Why don't we accelerate it? It all involves the top line. The chairwoman asked at the very beginning, and observed that funding pay equity is going to be a real challenge, and it is within our current caps. And same applies with CT. Within our current top line, we have to make some very hard choices within that top line. And so we've chosen to keep the programs moving, but not at the speed that we would like to if we had more funds overall.
All right. Thank you, Administrator. I yield back.
Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator, I want to start by expressing my thanks to TSOs across the country who worked through the pandemic and kept passengers safe. I wanted to ask specifically about Real ID. In May of 2023, air passengers are going to show a Real ID compliant form of identification at TSA checkpoints. While this implementation was delayed in part due to the pandemic, many Americans still do not have Real ID. How is the agency preparing for May of 2023, and how does the budget in front of us support an efficient and effective rollout that will be seamless for passengers?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. And on Real ID, you're right. Real ID implementation is scheduled for the 3rd of May of 2023, so less than a year away. The budget formally transfers the Real ID program from the Department of Homeland Security to TSA because now the lion's share of the work is within TSA's rubric. We intend over the course of the next year to increase our public information that is provided out there. You're already starting to see some additional messaging and checkpoints, but that's not enough. It needs to be much broader than that because some passengers only travel once or twice a year and wouldn't get that messaging. One of the things we found when we had the earlier deadline approaching, before COVID-19 hit and we extended the deadline, was one of the most effective ways to message the need for Real ID. It was just to simply tell passengers individually when they came into the checkpoint, well in advance, 6, 8, 10 months in advance, that, hey, the driver's license that you've presented today won't be good for access to the screening process as of May of 2023. And that way, that individual messaging gets the word out. Additionally, we have a very good relationship and are working very hard with all the DMVs across the country to make sure that we understand kind of where each DMV is with the issuance of Real IDs and providing whatever assistance we can in that process. But the Real ID, if you look at the credential authentication technology, that married up with the Real ID is a very, very powerful identity verification process.
I appreciate that. Is the budget justification highlights as well, many states are transitioning to mobile driver's license and digital IDs. Can you now shift and talk a little bit about how the budget supports TSA's work to integrate these types of identification and how that's going to interplay with the Real ID system?
Sure. The mobile driver's license is a form of digital ID, and there will be, I predict, several forms of digital ID out there. One of the things that we have done in working with digital ID and with mobile driver's license, the first use case for that is with Apple and the state of Arizona, and that went live a couple months ago, and so far it's working out very well. But we've worked hard to make sure that there's high fidelity in the transmission of data from a person's driver's license into their Apple Wallet in the case of Apple, or in the case of other phones, there's similar application for that purpose. And the other thing is that we've tried to standardize the means of transmission of that data from the phone, from the mobile device, to our credential authentication technology. And that's all standard NIST standards. So the idea was to develop the standards as we went along so that they could be universally used by any particular vendor going forward. And very shortly, shortly, we will publish an identity management roadmap. It will post it on our public-facing webpage that will describe the work that we're doing within TSA, within the federal government, and with other vendors on digital identity and how we're managing identity management overall. Final thing I'd say, sir, is that first and foremost in our minds on this is to make sure we protect the privacy concerns of passengers and to make sure whatever technology we put in place has very, very, very low error rates. And all of our testing shows that this is the case. So I think it's a very positive way forward. And if you think of touchless technology and the ability to get identity verified without literally touching anything, I think the way forward is pretty clear for digital identity.
Can you tell us how digital IDs, interact with your screening systems?
Yes, sir. What happens is with the current Apple Wallet digital IDs, the ones currently in place, that's probably the best way to describe it. As a passenger, when you walk up to the screening checkpoint, it will ask you, do you want to transmit your driver's license data to TSA? And it will also show you what data fields are going to be transmitted to TSA. And like you do with any payment system in the Apple Wallet, you double click the button so it confirms that you want to do that. And then you literally tap your phone on a reader device that we have with our CAT technology. And so it transmits it electronically. And then what the system does is it looks at a person's full name and their date of birth. And it also pulls the photograph on the driver's license electronically. It takes that electronic photograph and uses the camera to match it up with the person standing before, so a digital match. And then once you're complete and your identity is verified, and you walk away, as soon as you walk a certain number of feet away from that reader, all the data that we have from your driver's license is erased. And we put out privacy impact statements all the way through the development of this to be very explicit with passengers of, hey, what data were we using, and then how long were we retaining that data, which is a very, very short period of time.
Thanks for the update, Administrator. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member. Administrator Pekoski, I really want to begin by saying thank you for your service to our country, and also congratulations on I think your recent renewal for 5 years. We're very pleased to see that. So congratulations on that. I wanted to ask a question very briefly on the Federal Flight Deck Officers Program. I think it's a great program, and it's enjoyed strong support from this subcommittee since its inception, like almost 20 years ago, I guess. And I see we have several training facilities that are being added, including Atlanta back in 19, even though that's not a full-time facility yet, but I suppose it will be soon. But my question is, and I think locating that in a major hub is like brilliant because that's going to help get a lot of folks through that might not otherwise be able to. But my question is about the budget, because for about the last 5 years or more, I see a declining budget request for this program. Now, although we plussed it up in those years when Atlanta was being proposed, my real question is, we're committed to this program. Is the administration committed to this program? Not you necessarily, but coming from the president's budget request, I don't understand why they haven't been plussing this up as it's grown.
Congressman Rutherford, thanks first for your comments, and secondly, I agree and the administration agrees that this program is an incredibly valuable program. It provides, we're all about having layers of security in our security system. So if one layer isn't completely effective, the next layer will be. The Federal Flight Deck Officer Program is the epitome of that. I appreciate all the carriers allowing this program to proceed on board their aircraft, and certainly all the pilots and first officers to participate in the program. We saw a decline in enrollments, totally expected during the pandemic, and now we're in the recovery phase. And so we've now restarted some of the initial training courses, which are out in Artesia, New Mexico. We have a class of 32 that's going through this fiscal year, and then, 8 classes, and then 16 classes in fiscal 23. The recurrent training is critically important too, and I couldn't agree more that them in major hubs is very, very important. Atlanta, we started off, we still need to finish that, and that we will work on budget support for that into the future. But I would just highlight that our partnership with pilots and first officers and flight attendants is critically important to aviation security. And we've done an awful lot of work with both. I just need to make sure we keep focused on that. And we will work on putting together an overall plan to do that. So, we can see, where we are today, where do we want to get over the next 5 years, and what are the milestones to getting there?
They are the last line of defense. And I can tell you the Airline Pilots Association really appreciates you all and your focus on this program. Let me ask this very quickly. So under the credentialing authentication technology, I think you have about 1,520 units out right now. You've got 75 Cat 2s to be purchased in this budget. How many do you need going forward? And how's the rollout between the Cat 1s and the Cat 2s?
Yes, sir. The Cat 1's an earlier version, Cat 2 more capable. It has the camera with it. It has faster speed to it, and it will also have the ability to receive the digital identities. We eventually want to transition. We eventually want to upgrade all the Cat 1s to Cat 2s, and then future purchases will be of Cat 2s primarily. When we look at this program, basically the planning factor is for every standard lane, so not a pre-check lane, for every standard lane to have one Cat machine across the entire country, every single airport. And then for every pre-check lane to have 2 Cat machines, just to keep up with the pace of throughput through the pre-check lanes. These Cat devices too are relatively mobile, so they're not fixed to the floor, so you can move them around, and that provides extra versatility at the screening checkpoint. So when we re-baseline this program, the full requirement is going to be roughly about 3,500 machines, so a significant increase over what we have today. And it's going to be very important for continuing to develop our identity verification process. I mean, we're one of the only security systems around the world that verifies the identity of every person. A lot of systems require a boarding pass, but we require the boarding pass and the identity verification. And the other part with Cat that I should have mentioned earlier is, as a passenger, you'll notice that when the Cat machine is employed and you're asked to put your driver's license into the slot so it can read it, or put your passport down, we don't ask you for a boarding pass because part of the technology returns to us your flight status. So it's got multiple benefits, and we do want to expand the program. And these are relatively inexpensive machine to machine. It just took a lot to develop the technology.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Okay, that completes the first round, and so we're going to go into a second round. Administrator, before I go into my next topic, I want to go back to my original topic with regards to the pay increase for the workforce. And specifically, I'd like to know exactly what steps the administration is taking to ensure that the fee revenue that is proposed will actually be available. For example, is the administration working with the authorizers? Because as was mentioned earlier, it is going to take a change in law.
Yes, ma'am. And I can assure you that the administration will be working with the authorizers on this. We recognize it requires a change in law, and that originates in the authorization committee. So that work is certainly contemplated and underway.
Passenger volumes at many airports are now returning to or exceeding pre-pandemic levels, as you've mentioned. And we've heard recent reports of long lines at airports. For example, Congressman Doggett from Texas spoke to me about the delays at the airport in Austin, Texas. He told me the lines are so long that they overflow the airport terminal and snake up and down outside the building in very hot weather. The FY 2023 request includes $243 million for additional staffing to support the projected increase in passenger volume. This translates into an additional 2,540 positions. However, this funding will not be provided before October at the very earliest. What is TSA's current estimate of passenger levels for FY22? And are you on track to meet the associated staffing requirements, particularly as we head into the very busy summer season? And in addition to that, what steps is TSA taking to address the long lines at airports, such as those at Congressman Doggett's airport in Austin?
Everyone, thanks for the question. And I've just spoken to Mr. Doggett in his office last week, and then talked to him on the phone when we had the first wait time issue in Austin Airport as people were leaving from the South by Southwest event in Austin. Austin, Texas is rapidly growing. It's one of the fastest growing areas in the country, and airport volume has grown substantially there. We're doing our very best to be able to provide increased TSA capacity to meet that growth and to prevent wait times from exceeding our standards. Now, our standards for wait times, sometimes the line will appear very long, and I accept that we don't want people standing outside, particularly in a very warm climate. Our metric is to look at the wait time overall, and what we do is we establish them, and all of our planning is based on a wait time of 30 minutes or less for a standard passenger and 10 minutes or less for a pre-check passenger. By and large, across our system, we're able to meet those standards, but every once in a while, we're not. And unfortunately, I met with Mr. Doggett, I believe, last Thursday, and we hadn't seen a wait time exceed our standards in Austin Airport since South by Southwest. So it had been many, many weeks that we had not seen those increased wait times. But literally, the 2 days later, we had one, and part of it involves staffing that just doesn't meet the passenger volume that we're seeing. But we've tried to employ as many tools as we can to be able to address it, because we don't want to see large gatherings of people in public areas of the airport either.
Well, how often are these estimates made with regards to passenger volume? Because it isn't just Mr. Doggett, but I'm hearing from others who've had some really horrible experiences and long wait times at various airports. So how often are these estimates made, and exactly, how exactly is it determined?
Ma'am, a really good question, and we look at these estimates and we revise them as we need to. If we see an airport that's starting to spike up, we can literally revise them every 2 or 3 days if we need to, and that's how we determine from our national deployment force how many officers to send to those airports. For example, in Austin, we have 50 additional officers at that airport today, and beginning on Memorial Day weekend, we'll have 61 additional officers. The other thing that we're doing is we're redeploying some of our canine teams to airports that are seeing those increased wait times. But I would come back to the very good conversation we had earlier in this hearing. Our challenge right now is being able to bring on transportation security officers and get them certified to meet those volume demands. And really, people looking for employment in this environment have a lot of choice, and they're going to compare compensation levels. That's why the pay equity initiative is so important, and it has another importance that I think everybody is aware of, but I just would talk about it for a second to emphasize it. Is there are a lot of employees that we have that come into TSA to begin their federal career. They have an entry point to TSA. We go through all the process that a regular federal employee would require to be hired, and then they look for other opportunities. And it's no surprise that some of them would, because if they're looking at for a TSO, a 30% pay difference by moving to another federal agency, some people, depending on what their own personal desires are going to take advantage of that opportunity. So I think the pay issue will be the single most important thing that will help us address our staffing challenges. And it's very important. The signals that we all provide right now on this proposal are critically important, because people are expecting, given that it's in the president's budget, their expectation is that our pay it's going to make it actually harder than it already is in the next several months.
Well, I certainly hope that the administration will be working diligently with the authorizers in order to make this happen. Mr. Fleischman?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Administrator Pekoski, while the TSA is mostly known for aviation security, your agency also has primary oversight over the vast pipeline network that ensures the flow of energy throughout our country. The Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack had devastating impacts on the national energy supply, particularly in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. Mr. Administrator, what lessons has TSA learned from the Colonial Pipeline attack? And going forward, how is TSA partnering with CISA and the private sector to bolster cybersecurity throughout the transportation sector?
Yeah, thank you, Ranking Member. We are working very, very closely with the pipeline companies, and within the pipeline sector, there are thousands of companies. One of the things that we've done in very close partnership with CISA is to identify those companies that are most critical within that subsector. And then what we have done over the past year plus is we have used the authorities in TSA to require certain activities to improve those companies' resilience to a cyber attack. Colonial Pipeline was a ransomware attack. There are other attack vectors that make the pipeline sector, the rail sector, and the aviation sector vulnerable. And we have been working diligently with those companies and with other federal agencies to make sure that we improve our overall preparedness. So we've done things like requiring that cyber incidents get reported before the legislation that passed the Congress was in place, just so that not only we had a baseline, we in the federal government, but companies within that sector could see that, hey, I'm getting attacked, every X number of days. What has been the experience of other companies in the same sector, and just being able to benefit from the collection of that data. We require a cybersecurity coordinator to be available 7/24, so that if there is a cyber incident, we can get in contact with somebody right away. And we're working those reporting requirements for those two things through CISA, because the desire, and I think very, very positive, is to have CISA be the front door for private sector entities to come through with respect to cybersecurity concerns that they might have, and to be wanting to go to CISA for assistance. We've also required vulnerability assessments, contingency plans, and then in the case of pipelines in particular, we required certain measures to be put in place to raise significantly their cybersecurity baseline. Things like patching software, things like multi-factor authentication, administrator access, and things of that nature. What we've also done in our security directives for one of the very first times since my time as the administrator is generally our security directives are sensitive security information, so they are not released publicly. We felt that it was so important for every critical infrastructure owner and operator to see what the federal government was doing that we made those publicly available so that people could see the measures that we're recommending. And when I say we, it's CISA, the FBI, and all the sector risk management agencies. So in transportation, our co-sector risk management agency is the Department of Transportation, and we've worked very closely with PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Agency, the Federal Railroad Agency, and the Federal Aviation Administration, and also the Department of Energy. And I have seen terrific federal partnership on this. And I would also call out the companies, because we've asked them to do an awful lot in a very short period of time. They've done it. And I've been really very satisfied with the response of the companies that are critical within the pipeline sector and critical within the rail sector and the aviation sector. I mean, they put a lot of effort, a lot of people power to it, and a lot of financial resources to it. So I would say overall, a year later, our cybersecurity for critical transportation infrastructure is significantly better than what it was May of 2021.
Thank you for your comprehensive answer, sir. Sir, your budget requests $23.5 million to improve the cybersecurity within TSA's networks. Can you provide specific details on the specific initiatives this funding would support?
Yes, sir. That funding supports compliance with the executive order that the president put in place and a companion OMB management directive that requires federal agencies to improve their cybersecurity. The idea is that the federal agencies would be a key leader in the United States on good cybersecurity. For example, one of the things that we want to put in place is a zero trust environment across all the networks within the federal government. And what that means is, if you can access your computer system like we can now, you can access your computer system, and then you can literally go to different applications without having to re-authenticate yourself. Zero trust means that as you enter the system the first time, you still have zero trust in your ability to move to other applications, so you have to re-authenticate. Things like that are quite expensive to put in place, but critically important, because we don't want federal systems to be successfully attacked by cyber actors. They are attacked every day. We just don't want those attacks to be successful, and we want to be the example along with our private sector counterparts for good cybersecurity.
Thank you, sir. Madam Chair, my time's expired. I will yield back.
Ms. Henson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Administrator. Again, wanted to ask you a little bit about something that I find pretty concerning. It was reported last year that TSA allowed certain forms of non-traditional identification documents, including warrants for arrest or warrants for deportation, as allowable forms of ID for flying. Can you confirm that that was happening in the last year?
Yeah, I would just clarify what was happening, and we've worked really hard on this, really going back to 2019. We allow individuals who do not have a U.S. driver's license or a passport to present some immigration documents to the transportation security officer at the checkpoint. That document, though, is not their pass into our system. That document has a file number on it. And what we do is we take that file number and then contact CBP and ICE, get information from that file number to ensure that we can verify the identity of that individual. So it's not that people can just present the document and they get through with no further scrutiny. That is just a reference to a file that the immigration agencies have that we verify. Additionally, every single passenger. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, well, what happens if an identity can't be verified with that process? Are they subject to additional screening? Are they able to get on a plane without, knowing with absolute certainty who they are? Will they actually, because I think that's the biggest concern is, kind of a double standard here when Iowans and Americans are having to go through the process of getting a real ID in the next year. That's gonna be a huge hassle for them. And they wanna make sure that double standard is not being applied here.
No double standard. All passengers that do not have a form of acceptable ID that we go through our process, just like I described for migrants. If we can't be reasonably sure that it is that person, then we do additional screening on those individuals before they travel. If we have serious concerns about their identity, we do not permit travel. So we apply exactly the same standard across the system. And we are in the process of, as we've talked about today, of strengthening our identity management system overall.
Okay, well, that definitely, it makes me feel a little bit better knowing that you are applying that strict scrutiny standard to people. And I think Iowans obviously care about making sure they're getting on a plane and that it's safe and that same standard is being applied to everyone coming into our country. And many Iowans obviously are traveling again as the industry is rebounding. And you obviously mentioned earlier that TSA is expecting about 3 million passengers a day in the coming year. Obviously, I fly quite a bit between DC and Iowa, and actually just talked to some of our TSA folks on my way out of Cedar Rapids on Monday. And one of the things, obviously, that they brought up was kind of the upcoming retirements and workforce morale. So what are you hearing specifically about morale? Are there other things, and we've talked a lot about, retention and ways that we can maybe help support that in Congress, but are there some non-monetary ways where we could do that? And then could you just briefly speak about, long-term succession planning there?
Sure. Workplace morale is one of the key things that I focus on every single day. And I try as many times as I can. I just, like I mentioned earlier, came back from DFW. I was traveling last week as well to try to get out to the airports. And when I do, I walk around checkpoints, talk to the officers one-on-one to get a sense for what their morale is. And I also look at their FEVS results. So I think workplace morale and the esprit de corps amongst that workforce is critically important. I would also footnote that the jobs we ask our transportation security officers to do are hard jobs. They're on their feet all day long. Oftentimes in some of the largest airports, they're showing up for work at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning just to be ready for people arriving for those morning flights. And then in any airport, even the smaller ones, there are periods of time where, just like in traffic, you have rush hours. And airports generally on the East Coast, from 5 a.m. until like 9 a.m., it's rush hour. And it's just a constant flow of passengers going through. And those officers need to maintain our security standards all the time with every single passenger. You mentioned retirement, and I would kind of go back again to the impacts of not providing pay equity in fiscal 23. There are a lot of people that are retirement eligible. TSA is 20 years old, so you start to get retirement eligibility beginning at that point. Pay equity will increase pay so substantially that if you're a TSO and you're going to see a 30% pay increase, because the retirement is based on your highest 3 levels of pay, you would be incentivized to stay for 3 more years. And so that will help us soften out what could be a higher level of retirements than we've experienced in the past. Even if you stay for 1 more year, that 1 year at 30% above does increase the overall average. So there's benefit for the longer time you stay. So it does impact retirement. And the other thing we're trying to do, and this affects workplace morale too, is you've supported, I've asked and you've supported the provision of a number of incentives to our workforce, like those recruitment incentives, like incentives for retention based on the attrition rates at airports. Incentives are great, but for employees, the incentives don't count towards your retirement, and they don't count to your matches in your 401k equivalent, the TSP program in the federal government. So, this is a way to also provide more surety on compensation levels and more overall benefit to employees, because retention incentives can change over time. If attrition all of a sudden drops down to a very low number, we would decrease the retention incentives, which would change the basic pay that someone receives. So I really appreciate you engaging with our officers. I know many members of this committee do that. It means an awful lot to them. They know that they're doing very important work, but hearing how it's valued, and as I mentioned, Chairwoman and Ranking Member, you sent those letters. As I've told you in the past, when people passed away because of COVID, we posted them on our page where we reflect and really highlight the contributions of people who had passed away. Those are so meaningful to our employees, because they know that the Oversight Committee for TSA on the appropriation side, the members really care about their well-being. And it's very helpful to me in managing the agency.
Yeah, well, our supervisor in Cedar Rapids was sharing about the Des Moines recruitment efforts and how you're doing one-stop shops for recruiting people. So had a really good conversation with them, and just appreciate the work that you're doing. And obviously we have some work to do in this committee as well, but have to balance our priorities as well with the long-term costs. So certainly appreciate your time, Administrator. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator Pekoski, it came to our attention last year that TSA was allowing illegal immigrants to go through TSA and board planes, utilizing only DHS issued forms like a notice to appear, alien booking records, warrants for arrest of an alien, and warrant for removal of deportation. My question is, we really don't know who these people are. Are they, in many cases, we don't know who they are. Is there a special dispensation, I guess, that DHS has CBP officers get when they're moving and flying illegal aliens all over the country? Now, I know many times they use their charter flights, but they're also using domestic flights and putting these individuals on planes with American citizens and others who we know who they are. How does that happen?
Sir, when you talk about the immigration documents, as I mentioned earlier, those documents contain a reference to an immigration file that's maintained by both CBP and ICE, the immigration agencies. What we do with those documents is we don't use that document as the sole means of proceeding through the screening process for TSA. we use that document to go back to the A file and verify that the person that's in front of us is what's contained in that file. So we know that the person encountered by our immigration agencies is this individual. And then what happens in our process, whenever a person flies, whether it's a person that is not a citizen of the country or a citizen, we take the information on their flight information, their name, their date of birth, and the information on the A files to verify, and bounce that off all of the terror databases that the U.S. government holds. And so, we would know if that individual is a known or suspected terrorist, and we would proceed accordingly.
Well, here's my problem, sir. In Jacksonville, we had a case, illegal alien crossed the border, used one name, gave a fake date of birth. DHS flew him on a domestic flight to Jacksonville, where he then murdered one of my constituents. His name was Uyoha. Now, it wasn't until after the murder that ICE was actually able to determine who he truly was. So my question is, how does this guy get on a plane in Texas and we fly him to Florida? And quite frankly, we didn't know who he was. We had never proved who he was. So what is our policy on if you can't prove who they are? The information in the A file, that doesn't prove anything.
Well, what the A file contains, sir, is the information that CBP, generally, it's mostly the Border Patrol, obtained from the individual when they came through into the United States, or the CBP Office of Field Operations Officer through a port of entry. And what we look at from a TSA perspective is this person, based on their biometrics, watch listed in any way, shape, or form, and then we apply the right level of screening, or we deny boarding based on that watch listed status.
So you're telling me that these people are vetted and they get no special consideration because DHS is flying?
For DHS, and I'm going to assume that you're excluding the charter flights that the department.
Correct. Yeah,
operates.
I'm not talking about those.
No, we
I'm
take
talking just about the domestics where they're flying on an airplane with me potentially, or my children, or your children.
Well, we have not seen since 2019 any cases where we had a person with terrorist connections fly on a flight in the United States without the appropriate level of screening provided to them. Now, we have on any given day people in different risk categories that we apply additional screening to. So in the case of any person that doesn't have a driver's license or a passport, there's always additional screening provided to those individuals, and that applies across the board equally. The other thing that we put in place over the past year and a half is the use of an application that CBP uses to do biometric verification of people that they encounter coming across the border, whether through the Border Patrol or in the ports of entry. And that is a pretty good process for using the biometrics that they capture to ensure that the person that they identified is the same person that's presenting in front of us.
Okay. Thank you very much. I see my time's up, Madam Chair. I yield back.
I just got word that Mr. Rubisberger is on his way. There are several hearings going on, Administrator, at the same time. So just to give him a little bit of time to get here, I just want to ask one question, and that has to do with the counting of unmanned aerial systems and the pilot that is now going on at LAX. The 2021 Appropriations Act provided TSA funds to expand the countering unmanned aerial systems pilot to the second major airport, which, as I mentioned, started last year at LAX. Can you provide any kind of an update on the pilot at LAX?
Yes, ma'am. We have two, what we're calling test beds. One is in Miami, and that's been in place for several months now and been very successful and allowed us to test out systems and to get much better awareness of the prevalence of unmanned aerial systems in the airspace around Miami Airport. The second test bed is out at LAX. That will kick off in July of this year. And ma'am, we'd be honored if towards the end of the summer into the early fall, if you when you're going through Los Angeles Airport, if we could just have a little bit of extra time, we'd love to show you what that test bed looks like and kind of some of the results that we're looking at from Miami that will apply in the LA test bed. The other thing that I think is important here.
Administrator, let
is
me, on that point, if you would just have someone contact my office when
Yep.
we're about a week or two away from, the desired visit, I would very much like to do that.
Maybe.
Yes, ma'am. No, we really appreciate your time because I think you'd find it really informative. The other thing just to mention very quickly is that, the department's counter UAS authority expires in October of this year because the authorization was for a limited time. If that authorization is not renewed in October, those two test beds will have to stop, which would be a shame because we're learning a lot and this is a threat to aviation that we need to get better at.
Again, do you know if the administration is talking with the authorizers?
Yes, ma'am, we are. And the administration put out a counter UAS national action plan that calls for the reauthorization. It also calls for the provision of prototyping counter UAS on the part of state, local, and tribal territorial organizations. It has a national training plan, a national equipment certification plan. It's very, very comprehensive. And we'll provide your staff a copy of that plan.
All right, thank you. Mr. Rupesberger.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Administrator, thank you for joining us here today. I recognize that although your agents receive endless flack, their roles are critical to ensuring the safety of our transportation system. In that vein, one of the core functions of TSA is to screen the baggage of over 2 million passengers each day for explosives, weapons, and other contraband. The best tool to do that, in my opinion, is computed tomography, or CT, which your agency began using through a successful 2017 pilot program to ensure exceptional CT standards. TSA began requiring vendors to undergo a thorough testing process, a process which lands them on the Qualified Products List, or QPL. Now, as of May 2022, only one vendor had been cleared to supply CT units to TSA under the new procurement program called CPSS. Given there are many qualified vendors in the industry, this seems like a low figure considering there are other vendors who have previously provided TSA with CT units. While it is critical that TSA ensures vendors are meeting the necessary standards, it is also important for TSA to be transparent about expectations and timelines. Also, vendors need to address issues if they arise during the QPL process. To that end, I ask, what is TSA doing to improve vendor experience and understanding of the QPL process? And do you need more funding and additional personnel, expand the QPL, and evaluate all CPSS systems under review? I know I was talking another language, but you understand that. So if you could answer the questions, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Congressman. I appreciate your comments on the computed tomography capability. It's a significant improvement in our security effectiveness, and it also improves efficiency and passenger experience. I would also recognize all the work the vendors have done to be competitive for CPSS, that's checkpoint screening system awards off of our contract vehicles. And I do agree, I would like to have multiple vendors being able to compete for these contracts from a fully qualified basis. There's kind of a two-step process that we ask vendors to go through. The first process is certification, which means that the ability of their technology to detect meets the standards we have. And the second is qualification, which means that we look at things like maintenance, mean time between failures, staffing required, things of that nature. So that two-step process is important to get competitive for these contract awards. We know that we need to make that process a little quicker, but I do think that we've had pretty good back and forth with the vendors in terms of managing expectations, and be happy to talk with you personally about this if there are some specifics that you have that you'd like to share. But I do want to make sure that we have strong competition for this procurement. But at the same time, this closes a very critical security gap that we have, and it is important that we move with due speed to bring this capability in. The other thing I would observe is that we are still at the very beginning stages of this overall procurement. To date, if we get the FY23 funding that we've asked for, we will have completed 40% of the procurements for CPSS. So there's a lot more opportunity that exists out there. And along the way too, we want to make sure that we continue to improve the capability of the technology that we're purchasing. I think we've been very transparent about that, but I sense from your question that there's some concern about it, which I very much want to address. So I'd be happy to meet with you individually or with your staff to figure out what a good way ahead would be.
Yeah, my concern when you have contracting and in this area of the law, really, when you only have one vendor, that concerns me. When you have other vendors who have participated in the past, and from my understanding, they have a good reputation with you all. And I would suggest you at least look at it and review it to make sure that we can get more people who are qualified. And that's the process that we have. And I think it's worked pretty well in the past. So I just ask if you would look at it, evaluate it, see where we are, and make sure we can get the best for our country when it comes to what you do, which is very important to our country and our safety. Okay, I yield back.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes,
No.
sir. I absolutely commit to taking another look at that. I want to make sure that we do have as much competition as we possibly can.
Yeah, that's all we're trying to do. I think we'll make out in the best, and it might be the one there now. Who knows? That's the process.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, well, thank you for your comments, and I appreciate you looking at it again. Yield back.
Administrator, I believe there are no more questions, so we will conclude the hearing. Thank you very much for your time and for everything that you and your workforce does to protect the flying public. The Subcommittee on Homeland Security stands adjourned.